something,
Plot twist.
which is every time in life practically. But when it doesn't go well, I get upset. You get upset, you want to throw a tantrum because it needs to get fixed, it needs to go this way, my flight better leave on time. That's not how life works. And if you could learn to let that stuff go and even laugh at it a bit and just adjust, always have something on the side. Well, what would I do if I'm not going to be able to do this? And the problem is, though, is that not only do I get upset when things don't go as planned, which is typical, it's when things do go well as planned, my response to that is, that's what I expect. Well, how happy are you about that?
Exactly. Well, you work out, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to conceive in my own consciousness, my own internal gym, how do I go over to that gratitude machine, which is those muscles are not as well developed as my fear muscles, which I use. I can really pump some iron on those fear muscles and those lack muscles and those poor self-image muscles. The self-loathing machine, I can work on.
Well, that's the slave driver in us all. Yes.
But the gratitude, that's a machine, and the hope, and the aspirational. Those are ones that require my attention.
I work on this issue all the time. It's not something I've mastered by any means, but
nor do I know any. I don't know of any spiritual master. You talk about Wayne Dyer. I don't know if you're familiar with any of his work. To the day he died, he was working on those issues. He was working on that every single day, working right with us, doing the same.
Yeah, well, maybe the Dalai Lama doesn't have to, but I imagine most of us do.
I'm not sure that I'm not so sure that that's true.
That's true.
Because from my understanding, he's very much of a growth mindset oriented being.
Yes, and I think that's a good thing, especially because it keeps us humble. And humility, I think, is important because we sometimes can forget. They always talk about how absolute power can go to someone's head.
Oh, yeah.
And you start thinking you're better than other people for some reason. It's like you may have had some better luck, or you may have hit something at the right time, which is still luck. A lot of this isn't just your talent and about you. It's about life. And you just happen to be in the right place at the right time.
Yep.
It doesn't make you better than anyone else. It doesn't make you anything other than you should be grateful.
Exactly.
And instead, a lot of people aren't quite like that.
And I love that as a concept, Bart, because the minute I get into the comparative, whether better than or less than, it takes me away from the concept of being what is mine to do, what is my unique self, my unique gifts, that was however this amalgamation of consciousness gathered, who knows, right? I lose that the instant I get into the comparative.
Well, I think a lot of that comes from, what's going on right here.
Yeah.
Especially, I was listening to an interesting TED Talk, which I get so much out of those when I'm listening to these. And it's
Have you done one yet?
Not a TED Talk yet. So
Okay.
I'm very interested in something like that. And I love what I learned from every single one. And one of them I learned about was that prefrontal cortex. And the idea of the prefrontal cortex sets us apart from other animals. We are able to, in a better way than other animals, create scenarios in our minds, alternatives. What is the situation? What does it mean? It could mean this, it could mean that, it could mean that. And you can make decisions based on, well, I could choose this, I could choose that, I could choose that. We don't just react and do this. We can see all sorts of choices.
Right.
But one problem that human beings have, and this is what they identified, was that we tend to veer toward the negative. We tend to, and it's a survival mechanism.
Sure.
So you fear the what ifs. And the what ifs isn't, what if it goes well? The fear is, what if it's a disaster?
Right.
And so we focus on the worst case scenario versus anything positive. So if you could lead with the positive, which is, well, why couldn't something positive come out of this?
What if it, exactly.
Be aware of the negatives so that you can plan and make choices that might not lead you to failure.
Yep.
But failure is not a bad thing. It is the most impactful lesson one can learn in life.
Right.
And yet people fear failure. They fear stepping out of their box, trying something new, which brings us back to the original conversation we were having about jobs changing all the time. You have to reinvent yourself because this world is constantly changing. Technology is changing us, people are changing, the world is changing. We have to change with it, and yet, even though the only thing you can count on in life is change, what's the one thing that most people hate the most?
Yeah. So how do you I'm thinking about this as an emotional growth exercise. How do I build that muscle to be more resilient to change, to be more peaceful during that opportunity? How do you do that?
Well, a friend of mine always reminds me, try to be kinder to yourself, because I'm not very kind to myself. And one of the things that's helpful.
That's a great subject. That is a great subject. Let's talk about that.
Well, one thing I learned when I was young, I was probably in my late 20s when I began to realize how messed up I really was with my mind. I thought the problem was other people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's them. If they would only.
You only have to go through so many bad relationships before you realize the common denominator. Where's the problem? And I didn't realize the depth to how messed up I was until I was in my late 20s and took an honest look at my life and the choices I was making.
Yeah.
And who's responsible for my choices?
Yeah.
And so I read a book called Self-Parenting.
Now, what year was this? What year were you 20?
Oh, well, this was when I was 28. So this would have been in 1988. So I was born in 1960.
So you were born in 60. I was born in 1948. Just to give
I thought
our
you and I
connection.
were the exact same age.
Yeah.
Wow.
So what you and I, so what we have in this is a generation apart. We're a generation as what we're going, but you grew up in 1960 where?
I grew up in Houston. So my father was in the military, so we lived all over during the 60s, and including one option he had not to go to Vietnam was he could go be assigned to Alaska, and so we all moved to Alaska, which was interesting and probably the most devastating time to our family because it did psychological damage that created serious problems for my family for the next 15, 20 years.
Wow.
And shaped my life in a very big way, and that was when I was 6. So, and I became a very different person from that point until my 20s. But
which I'm going to want to talk about and have a lot of this conversation. But hey, everybody, this is Bart Loesser. This is my friend. And Bart and I met in Toastmasters. And Bart, you are a corporate trainer. You have a business. You go travel all over the United States and beyond, and helping executives and teams to communicate and collaborate at higher levels than they would before. What a perfect time for you to be doing this. And while that subject fascinates me, I'm in the field myself. What I want to talk about is both of us. At the beginning, when we were talking about that you were born in 1960, I was born in 1948, and during that time, both of us grew up in an era of when being different, when we really need to be to the homogeneous norm. This was what we were growing up to be, and both of us, in different ways, felt that we weren't. So that's where I want to take your journey, because I want to take you up through the time when you were diagnosed as HIV positive. And that time. So can you bring us up to that date a little bit and give us some background so I could understand a little bit about what it's like to be Brad Loesser?
well, actually,
Bart.
yeah,
Bart.
okay.
And I know everybody in the control room. Hello, everybody. You know it. All right, we said it. All right, now I've got it.
You got it out of your way.
We talked about it beforehand. We did all these exercises. Anyway, thank you, Bart.
No worries, no worries.
Yeah, go ahead and reintroduce.
Okay.
Start again?
We'll cut it. Yeah,
We can do that. Yeah.
Okay.
we're good.
All right.
It sounds great so far, y'all.
All right.
All right.
Terrific. All right. Well, we're going to start. We'll start again. And so we'll do this as take two. Okay. Now, hello everybody, and I am so glad to have my friend Bart Loesser on Reasonably Spontaneous Conversation. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on this show, we're both in the same field of corporate training. That's what we do for our living as our vocation, and you travel the United States with teams and corporations, helping them to communicate and collaborate at higher levels. And that's my joy also. The reason why I wanted to ask you on to the show is because both of us are human beings who are growing human beings. And we have come up through this time. You were born in?
1960.
Okay, and I was born in 1948. Could you tell a little bit about your journey during that time so that we can, I can learn a little bit about you as a male during this time. Tell me a little bit about Bart Loesser.
Well, it was certainly a very different world that I grew up in, even different from the world you grew up in. So I think it's fascinating to understand the differences between generations and what impacted us and made us who we are. And we were taught various different truths, at least that we believe to be truths, about how life is and how it must be and what it takes to be successful and to fit in. Which I believe as human beings is the one thing we all want more than anything, is just to feel like, not just to fit in, but to feel like we matter. And that's, I think every human being, if we could teach them that no matter who you are, what you bring to the table, you matter. And I think that's part of my message that I try to spread to people as I'm teaching them what I teach. And I'm very passionate and grateful to have the opportunities I do to get in front of a corporate audience who would never think to come and listen to the messages I teach, because I teach those interpersonal skills in the workplace, but I teach much more than that. I really like teaching people more the idea of what is the function of life? Why are we here? What is worthwhile? How do you find your path? How do you find happiness? Which is essentially what I try to teach people. Whether you're going to be happier at work or happier in your personal life. And I think that stems from my life, where I spent most of my life struggling with that question. How can I be happier? And if you had asked me at the age of 8, what do you want to do with your life? My answer was, at that time, all I want to do is to try to find a way to make people happier. Because I'd grown up in a group of people who seemed supremely unhappy, even though we had the basics. We were, fortunate. We were very middle class and very, we had a great life, but we were never happy. We had those moments of happiness. But in general, it seemed like we just were miserable. I'd mentioned a little earlier in our pre-talk that even though I grew up in Houston in the late 60s on, and my family's from that area 5 generations back, my dad had joined the Army to pay for his medical schooling at the year I was born. And so immediately I was born in El Paso because Dad was at Fort Bliss training there. Then my next brother was born less than a year later at Fort Hood. So we were in Houston, or in Texas a lot, but we were all over Texas. And then after my younger brother was born and we spent 2 years in San Antonio, then we moved to Fairbanks, Alaska, mostly because my parents had that as a choice. Do that, or my dad could get shipped off to a MASH unit in Vietnam. And he already had a friend there and knew how devastating that was. So he decided to move us all to Fairbanks. And it was a different type of devastation, I think, in some ways, because even though my mother she was very close to her family, she never felt comfortable being away from that support system she had. And when she lost that support system for that year and a half and had to live in an environment where sometimes you couldn't even go outside, it was hard to interact with people. She didn't know people well, and she was not very outgoing in that sense. And so it was difficult for her. Plus, she had 3 little boys who were always trying to kill each other constantly. We were just small kids, all a year apart. And it just drove her to the edge. And for a period of, from that time in 1967, her first breakdown, for the next, at least 10 or 15 years of our lives, I never knew from one day to the next whether she was going to decide to live or she was going to kill herself. And growing up like that.
Your heart. Exactly. Were you the caretaker?
Well, being the middle child, and all three of us dealt with it differently, and
Yeah.
and my mother would get questions like that from people because later on, when I became an AIDS activist and certainly was openly gay at that point, and
Yeah.
my parents had come to an understanding of it, and they actually, and I'm very proud of this, that they got very involved later in life and became presidents of PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays.
God, that is amazing process.
Oh, my
To
parents were
be-
amazing, yeah.
To be gay during those years, how did you come to the consciousness of I'm a gay man, or a gay adolescent, or what?
Oh, I was
Talk
a
to
gay
me-
kid. By the age of 6 or 7, a lot of gay children, especially boys, know clearly that the feelings that they may have toward a male figure is clearly not appropriate, because you learn from society what is appropriate, how you should feel, and you're thinking, no one's talking about these feelings I'm having.
Wow.
And so what you learn at an early age is you don't share that with anyone. So you hide everything. And I remember even in the 6th grade, 5th grade, learning how to walk and talk the way I thought a male should talk. Try to talk with it, even at that age of
Sure.
11, trying to have a deep voice, making sure I walked in a masculine way, that I
Right.
didn't run like a girl, things like
Yeah.
this. And being totally panicked that at any moment someone might discover. And of course, boys all the time are accusing other boys of being gay, and so
Right.
that was the worst thing that someone could be accused of, so I was always trying to hide it because you knew what would happen at that time. So it was a very different age, which it's not anything the way it is today, but certainly then you knew you don't share it with anyone and you don't talk about it and you hide it. And what I'd hoped was maybe what happens is once you hit puberty, it changes.
Yeah.
Because
the
they always talk
easy
about
time, right?
Yeah. Well, they talk about
Sure.
how young boys, little boys always hate little girls, and then, but at one point, it'll turn around, and
You
then
bet.
you can't stop thinking about them. Well, that never happened to me. It never changed. Now I did start thinking about boys in a very different way,
Yeah.
or men, in certain types.
Starting to get when the hormones hit and we begin to have that
Yeah,
that's-
when you have a reaction to a male figure, wait a minute, that's not normal,
Right.
that's not okay, and you're told by all of society not only that it's not normal, but something can happen to you
Right.
if anyone finds out.
exactly
You can be ruined.
if you toss into that, because to me that gets into the shame.
Oh,
and when we
yeah.
and shame is that place where it really gets us into dysfunction for me. Every time I'm in a shame consciousness, it's devastating emotionally.
Shame is never a helpful emotion, one that just makes you feel less than,
No.
that you don't belong, that you
Yep.
don't deserve,
Yep.
that you're not
And
worthy.
it infects everything.
Oh yes.
So there are, and that's where. All right. So how did you work through that? When did you begin to meet people or see that you were not alone?
Well, there are lots of, everybody responds differently to situations. And even in the childhood situation, when I was growing up, I mentioned my mother was asked a question, well, why do you think your son is gay? They were trying to get to that somehow she had done something. And they were looking for what did you do? You weren't the right kind of mother. Maybe you were too smothering, or the father wasn't there for you and such. And she was
Wow.
going, well, perhaps you can answer this question to me. I have 3 boys. Only one of them is gay. And they're all a year apart. They were raised in the same environment, and they had the same things happen to them. And all 3 of them responded in very different ways, which is true. All 3 of us responded completely different. My older brother became the rebel, got into drugs, was the one who was doing everything that he wasn't supposed to do. My younger brother, he threw himself into school and his friends and isolated himself from the house by living his life outside. And I did the opposite of that. I isolated myself within and had learned at the age of, I was 11 at the time when I had some of the worst of the abuse I got from the kids.
Yep.
And in the 6th grade, I had this incident that happened where I was beat up in a classroom right at the end of the break for Christmas break.
Mm-hmm.
And after I was beat up and they had destroyed the gifts I'd given to, I got this great gift for somebody that you had to exchange. He destroyed it. Everyone laughed and they all left the classroom to leave for spring break or Christmas break. And I was devastated by that. And they had, knocked me down and kicked me and stuff when the teacher was not there. And and then just left the room laughing. And then a boy comes in and he's consoling me and saying, yeah, they treated you so awfully. And he's patting me on the back and saying how horrible it was and they shouldn't have done it. And I thought, wow, wow, somebody actually understands. Somebody's, maybe they're not all awful people. And so one of the things that I didn't realize was at that time he had had chalk erasers on the back of his hand, and he was actually hitting me on the back of the head and my shirt with chalk. And then he left with a good laugh, and after that, if I could have gotten a gun and blown them all away, I probably would have. And I dreamed of that for years, getting revenge on them. But I decided at that moment, that's it.
Or take it internally and to say, okay, well, if I can't do that, I can go ahead and check out.
Well, that's what I did. I decided then I will trust no one. And that was the lesson I learned, was I will have no friends, no associations with people. And so from that point on until I was, a senior in high school, when I made any attempt to connect with people, I was a loner.
Yeah.
If you had known me back then, I would not be the person you see today. But that was how I chose to deal with it, because I realized you can't trust anyone, and thus I will just isolate myself in life and just survive.
Wow. So how did you, tell me, what was the next step of the story? Because one of the things that I know about you, and I know, is that you have a deep compassion. You have a deep compassion. You have worked in the HIV and AIDS research and in helping in the activism, and this is all part of your compassion for it. So how do you get there? What are the interesting spots along the way that you can give me some insights into how the resilience of the human being?
Well, one lesson I learned that was interesting was when my mother told me that your senior year is the best year of your life. And she knew I was a loner and I had no friends. And in my junior yearbook, I was not even in it. I think maybe I might have had a junior year picture, but it's as if I didn't exist, which I was more than happy of being a ghost at that point. It kept me safe all those years. But I realized I didn't want that. I wanted to be popular.
Right.
And I was about as far from popular as one could be. And I decided to take my mother's words seriously, and I decided I'm going to create a fake person. I'm going to create somebody who's fun, outgoing, and who everyone looks up to.
Yeah.
That's who I wanted to be. So my senior year, I decided to join every organization in the school that the school pretty much had to offer. I wanted to be on student council, which you can only be if you get elected. So I'm not going to get elected. I'm a ghost at that school. And so I decided, well, there's one other way, is you could be the president of a student organization. Well, how's that going to happen? Well, actually, there was a club that didn't exist, the science club. And so I decided I'm going to take on that club and I'm going to build it into something. So even though science is the last thing that I'm good at, I decided to be the president of this club, and my goal was to get on make all these announcements at the school, and I loved having that chance to do it. And I'd always make these announcements about the meetings of the science club. Come join us. We're going to do more than any other club in the school's history. We will make a mark that will change your life forever. I'd give these speeches like this, and we built the club up to like 20 kids who joined this club. And they elected me the president, and then I was on student council. And my dad had a Suburban, so I could take 12 kids all over the place. So we were doing field trips to NASA, because we were in Houston at that point. So we're going to NASA, Armand Bayou. We went to Dickens on the Strand when it was brand new, and it's now this giant event. But back then it was new. We went to the Renaissance Festival when that was new. I took people everywhere saying, well, this is historic science. This is this kind of science. We'd do experiments on the school campus. And I just created this character that was always doing something interesting, trying to dance madly so that people wouldn't see that I'm actually not that person.
Yeah.
So I
But
created
there was aspects of you that was that person, right? I mean,
it
there are
took
parts
me years
of
to
us
learn that, because I thought I was completely fake. I thought if they really knew who I was, they wouldn't like me. They only like me because they think I'm this popular person.
Exactly. Exactly.
And then after I graduated, and my picture was everywhere. I mean, you look in the yearbook, I'm all over the yearbook. Of course, it didn't hurt to be on the yearbook group. So,
sure.
But I was certainly one to. I looked very popular then.
Exactly.
And then I went on to UT in this giant environment in Austin and became invisible again.
This is 1978?
This is 1978. Yeah.
Okay, and so there you are. And so what was the race consciousness of the United States for gay men in 1978 and in Austin, Texas in 1978?
It was just beginning to change. We were becoming much more visible. This is when Harvey Milk got elected in San
Yes.
Francisco.
And by the way, what, like 6, 7 times he failed before he actually
yeah.
got elected. So it's not like
An
it was just
openly gay man, though. And people say, well, it's San Francisco. Well, at that time, not even in San Francisco could a gay man get elected.
Thank you.
And he did. And then, what was it, a year or so later is when he was murdered, which
Yep.
was in 1978, which just says,
And this is
there you
before
go, you're
Stonewall,
open,
right?
you're out. Oh, no, well, Stonewall is in 1969.
69.
That was when the riot was,
Okay,
yeah.
good. All right.
That's-
Help me with dates as I'm going. Continue.
This is actually the 50th anniversary of Stonewall this year. So this is, it's an interesting time because a lot of people who are out and gay today don't know what was going on back then. And this was your generation.
Yep.
People who were, when they were in their 20s
Yep.
and living in New York, and the only place they could meet anyone, and it was safe, was you could go to a gay bar and
Yep.
actually meet somebody that you're attracted to and could
Yep.
connect with. And so it was an interesting time, but also at that time, the police and others knew they could harass us
Yep.
and get away with it. And so they would constantly come to the bars and harass people. And back then, they not only would arrest you if you were drunk or resisting arrest or any excuse possible.
Exactly.
But then your name would get printed in the paper for having been arrested at this gay bar. So if you were in a relationship with a woman or if you had a job, they could find out and you could easily be fired. So we could easily be harassed.
Yes.
And that's why in that evening in June, I think it was June 30th of 1969, which was the day that Judy Garland got buried. So these drag queens in this bar in New York were doing a show to express their sorrow about
Yep.
the death of their
and
queen,
the celebration of Judy Garland.
who meant so much to them. And because she was this tragic figure who also needed help, and we would reach out to her because she was so talented, and yet she didn't believe in herself at all.
Who does that remind us of?
Yes, I know. And someone with that much talent
Yep.
who doesn't think they're worthwhile.
Yep.
And how that drove her entire life. All the decisions she made was because of that. And even in the end, she didn't think her life mattered at all. And yet so many people loved her. And it didn't matter, it seemed, because it wasn't a matter of how much they loved her. She couldn't love herself.
Bart. Yeah.
And that's one of the common themes that, of course, a lot of gay people, we can't love ourselves. Look what society, they don't even love us.
Yeah.
And we can't love ourselves. So when our idol, who expresses what's been our lives too, dies, they're having this moment of deep grief and making the most of this and dealing with it. And that's when the police decided they're going to raid the bar. And they had had enough. And so when they started to arrest
riot.
them, somebody stood up and said, no, we're not going to this is not going to happen. Then the news started spreading out in the neighborhood, and then suddenly police cars were being overturned and burned. They're not going to keep doing this to us anymore. And they burned places in New York for a week. It was a big riot. It's not a celebration. This was a riot.
Yeah.
But it was the first biggest time where we truly stood up and said, we will not stand for this.
Were you in 78 in Austin? You were aware of this?
Well, I was
That it happened?
we didn't know much about gay history at that point.
Okay, so
I had to learn about that.
All right, so you were here. So talk about this, because this is a time when there was, in pre-AIDS, there was very little consequences.
Well, let's talk about what happened from 1969 on.
Would you please?
Yeah, because as from Stonewall on, gay people started standing up for themselves more and saying, wait a minute, we do matter. We do have value, especially in the big cities. So starting with the celebration of having pride, so starting the first Pride Parade.
Yes.
And then doing that on an annual basis and letting gay people know we are okay. And then in 1978, a movie came out called Making Love. And that was a movie that really impacted my life. I think it was 78. I'm trying to remember when it was. No, that was in the early 80s. So it was in 81. But during this period in the media, gay people started finally for the first time having roles in movies and in TV shows that were positive characters, not characters who were drunks or people who wanted to kill themselves.
Billy Crystal on Soap.
Exactly.
right?
That was a
Who
major
that
character.
was the first time you had a major character
Who was, he wasn't, I wouldn't call him
on a
normal,
sitcom.
but he was lovable and his family acknowledged him.
Acknowledged and accepted it, exactly.
Yeah. So it was the first time that we were speaking out and being able to say we do matter, and then society started accepting us.
Exactly.
And we were becoming more and more exposed, building on our self-esteem, being much more open in society. People were seeing, gosh, there are a lot of gay people. Where'd they all come from? Well, we've always been there. We just never shared that with anyone.
Right. So there's a difference between the foreground, background.
So now you could, by the time in '78, there were gay bars that you could go to that didn't get rated. That you didn't have to, you had to be careful,
Sure.
but you didn't have to fear that your life and your career would be destroyed if it was discovered.
Yeah.
That had changed in just 10 years.
And had you come out to your family then?
Oh, I was barely coming out to myself at that point. And so in 1981 was the first time I ever got the courage to even interact with a male.
Yeah.
Because I thought, I can't even deal with this. So when I finally did and had met someone in 1981, I guess we were seeing each other for a few times, but I was so uncomfortable with myself, I couldn't deal with that. And even the second person that I started dating with took me to a concert, and I found out after the concert we went to that his cousins who went with us knew that I was his date. I was so appalled, I broke up with him at that moment. How dare you tell somebody about us? And so it's like I was that embarrassed, and I was. Now I'm a little bit ashamed that I did that at that time.
No,
but that's how
still,
much.
But you know, the thing about this though, Bart, is that this is you can't take anything out of history. And when we grow up with that those kinds of race mind consciousnesses, that this is all right or it is not all right, it is very difficult for us to break through with it. I, like you, I just knew I liked little girls when I was a kid. There was no choice about it. I just knew that was just the way I was wired. But yet I also felt different and had this self-loathing and work because I knew as an artist and as an entertainer and all that there was something different about me, and I also wanted the same. Your story, what I love so much about your story is that you are telling my story.
In many ways, just as a male, the one thing we share most in society is that we're both males who were raised in this period. And one thing men generally, and this is changing today, but back then especially, men were always taught you could have your masculinity stripped away from you at any moment. All you have to do is do anything that goes against what being masculine is. And we're going to make you fit into this masculine mold of this is what a male is. And if you like to cook, if you like to do anything in the arts, no, that's gay. That's what women do. That's not okay for men to do that. And women don't, they have their different ways that women have been challenged, but men have always been challenged by each other.
Well, this is history. That's her story.
Exactly.
And so it's not not either or, it's an and gate, and that's what we're learning. And so what we're talking about is his story, the stories of males growing up during this time.
And I'd say male oppression. Just like we have female oppression, there's male oppression in our culture. And so what we are taught to be as men, what you have to do to be okay, you have to walk a very fine path.
Exactly.
And you don't step off that path.
It's very rigid.
Exactly. And that's changed a lot. And that's a great thing, that men could be whatever they want to be, and it doesn't have to be a threat, and women could be whatever they want to be, and that's not a threat.
That's very exciting. And so what happened during this time? So you started dating, and you began and going through college, and so...
Starting to explore who I was for the first time, and realizing, wow, I can actually find someone that I like, and maybe even have a relationship with. Wow. And we were starting to see it in the media, so I believed it might be possible. But then something I didn't know at that time in 1981, which was there was this insidious thing that was starting to appear in the gay community.
Yes.
And if you ever watch movies like, The
Angels
Normal
in
Heart
America.
is one of my favorite movies to watch, because when I see that movie, I thought, that is the story of my life. Now, it takes place in New York in 1981 in Fire Island, but that was also Houston in 1984.
Thank you.
Where it started, where you started hearing these rumors about this disease and it's affecting gays. Oh no, that's society doing that to us. They're trying to create something to attack us again. That's all this is. This can't really be happening. So we could be in our own denial. about what was going on. And then in our denial, we wanted to believe it's only New York or it's only San Francisco and it's only those people or only those who are sluts out there having sex with lots of different people. You know, if you're just in a relationship with someone, you're not at risk. If you're dating someone, you're not at risk. And so I didn't realize, though, at this time in 1981, that at the time of my finals in school, I got very ill just before my finals, and I'm trying to study, and I was deathly ill. I was for about 2 weeks and had shingles. I could hardly concentrate. I would high fevers, didn't know what was going on, and it was unusual because I'm not a person who ever gets sick. I mean, it's like I hear other people getting colds and the flu. It's like I don't get those sort of things. I don't know what it's like to get sick. But there was a time in 1981 where I was deathly ill for like 2 weeks. And of course, today I clearly know what happened at that point. And it was those first two guys, Arturo and Ralph, that I was dating. And as I've learned later, when I moved back to Austin in '96, that both of them had AIDS. And that most likely they had it when I met them and knew them in 1981. And so the very first boyfriends, the very first time I ever had sex, period, I'd gotten infected. And didn't know it because, well, first of all, you can be HIV positive for 5 years, 10 years, maybe even longer without having any side effects of your immune system finally being diminished so much that you get sick, compromised, where you're at that level of AIDS. So I went for many, many years not knowing anything, not thinking anything, and thinking, I'm not at risk. And it was only at the point where now, in the mid-90s, or mid-1980s, I had lots of friends that just I connected with, I had a wonderful life. For the first time, I had friends in my life, people that I was really close to. I had a boyfriend I was in love with. Life couldn't be better. I had a job. I was working for Merrill Lynch. I had finished school and I was going to go into finance. My background was psychology, but I thought I can help people with finance just as much as helping them with other issues. So
of course,
I'll do that. And you can make some good money doing that. And so I have a career. So in 1986, everything was going fine until my best friend, who was my first gay roommate, had moved off to San Francisco in the beginning of 1986. And in February of 1986, actually it was in March, he called me to say he was sick. And I thought, what do you mean? He said, it's AIDS. And I thought, you can't have AIDS. You know, first of all, the only people who get AIDS are people who are not like us. It's those other types.
Yeah.
You know, those who are just outrageously having lots of sex with people, the wild
houses,
people. Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. It's not us. And he said, well, it is me, because I've been diagnosed and I've been told I only have a few months left to live. So I'm going to go move home to North Carolina with my family. And I said, you can't move in with your family. They're born-again Christians. They're not going to accept you. They never accepted you before. They're certainly not going to accept you now. Well, they did in their own way, as long as he renounced being gay and renounced his lifestyle and gave his forgiveness over to God and got born again. Then they would let him live at home until he died a few months later, which I went out and visited him before he died, which was nice that I got to do that. But it made me realize, as I started to think about it, well, if he could have it, maybe I should get tested, because we're all telling people don't get tested because you know what they're going to do. They're just going to identify you and then send you off to some island.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's what they're recommending. Reagan's all about, you know, sending people off to some Caribbean island to, you know, just let's identify who has it and send them away.
You mean like a leper colony?
Oh yeah, exactly. No, that was how it was. Mm-hmm. Wow. And there was that much fear because, like when you see that movie, The Normal Heart, you see the fear as it's growing, and you start to know people.
I don't know how's this spread. What happens? How do we do what? Yeah.
Yeah, and we didn't really know a lot of this stuff, and even the test was brand new, and so at least there was a test because there hadn't been that for many years.
So when did you get? So you decided after?
So I decided
shingles?
that summer to get tested in the summer of 1986, expecting it to be negative.
Yeah.
And you get tested, and then you have to wait for several weeks. Mm-hmm. And I just put it out of my mind and came in there expecting to be told, you know, hey, you're fine.
Clean bill of health.
I said, yeah, of course. I'm from Houston. I live the right lifestyle, so I'm fine.
Yeah.
And he said, I hate to tell you this, but, and he was a doctor. He said, he just paused. He said, you've been diagnosed with HIV, and you might want to start thinking about your life, because right now at 26 or 25 at that point, you're not going to see 30. So you might as well start planning. And also, as we were looking at your tests, we noticed your cholesterol level's a little high. You might want to look at that too.
I'm sorry, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did you enjoy the play?
How was the play? Yeah.
Jeez.
And it's like, okay, I had some choice words to use.
I would hope so.
And I stormed out of there not knowing what to do. For the first time in my life was together. I was finally happy. I even had planned on, I came out to my parents because I was in love. I wanted to share that news with my parents. And suddenly now I'm told I'm going to die, and die in probably the worst way possible. And I didn't really know where to go from this. And at least I had some friends who were involved. And one of my good friends, the one that I had started dating, that I'd fallen in love with, Bruce, was one of the people who helped to start AIDS Foundation Houston. And so when I shared the news with him, he said, well, we need to get more information. You need to know what's going on. You need to know what the facts are. And so he's the one who really led me to finding out more information. But one of the things I realized was, if I'm going to die in the next couple of years, I don't want to spend what will be probably 5 or 10 years of hard work building my financial business, my financial career.
Right.
So I decided that's done. I'm quitting that. And then didn't know what I wanted to do. But I did start volunteering for AIDS Foundation Houston. And then that led to me going back to school to work on my advanced psychology degrees. So I was going to the University of Houston Clear Lake and working on the hotline. And then I eventually became the director of the hotline. And then in 1987, they opened up funds for educators. And they said, would you like to be the first HIV educator to work with the gay community here in Houston? I thought, it's the perfect job to have for the next couple of years before I die. So I decided to take that on as my new career at that point.
And how were you physically? How did it physically impact you? Was there any physical manifestation or presenting?
No, there was nothing physically to tell me there was anything different from my body than I'd felt for the last 5 years.
Other than you have a death sentence.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that sometime soon it's going to happen. And so all you need to do was to check your T cells and see how those are doing. And as long as they don't fall below 200, your immune system is still roughly working. Mm-hmm. And so we just say keep doing that. And what medications are there? There was only one. That was AZT. And you take that medication, it generally destroys you before the disease does.
Right.
And so I said, I'm not considering that, so there was no treatment. Essentially, I would just say, well, I guess I just have to help people as best I can until I die. And that was my plan. So that's what I did for the next couple of years, was try to help people as best I can. And then it was very, very quickly after that, especially working at the AIDS Foundation, I'd known hundreds of people who were sick, dying, and helped them to go through that process.
And help them to go through a gracious death, as gracious as it could be?
Oh, well, so many parents and society wouldn't treat people. Hospitals wouldn't accept people for the longest time. You know, if you had AIDS, they said, you go someplace else you can get treatment. We're not taking that risk, especially when they thought they didn't know how it was spread. Even in '86, we were pretty clear, this seems to be bloodborne. And, it's blood, it's semen, it could even be some vaginal fluids. We're not absolutely sure, but definitely if there's any blood in those fluids, there's risk.
Yep.
Well, then it's like, well, what if you were bleeding from your mouth? Could you kiss somebody? Could you share a spoon with somebody? What's the possibility of that? It's possible, but not in any way likely. But
it doesn't matter. It gets into our head.
Exactly. And society was panicked about that. And there were plenty of people who wanted to say, you can't prove you can't pass it that way, so I don't even know if I can touch you, much less, be close to you in any way.
Yes.
And there were families who just threw people out of the home. They wouldn't take care of them. Hospitals wouldn't. And so
you
the
saw
gay
all
community
this in Houston, because Houston is it's the fourth largest city in
one of the
largest,
country. Definitely. And we realized in the gay community, we had to take care of our own because there was no one else to do it. And so during those years, we learned to become these agencies that now exist who have these services. We developed those services through the work we did because there was no choice. The government gave us little to no support, and society definitely didn't do that. So we had to learn this all on our own.
So were you part of the, like Liz Taylor, and who was really pushing for funding for the AIDS
Oh, yeah.
research and all. So was that part of your?
Well, that was part of it. I mean, I was involved with ACT UP. I was involved with AIDS Foundation Houston. I was an activist to a point, but I'm also a professional at that point, so I have to be careful about how far I go. You know, do I get myself arrested? Because I loved what ACT UP would do sometimes,
Right.
because sometimes you have to tell society, if we have to fight back to get some rights, we will fight. And they were willing to fight.
Sure.
They were the perfect agency for that.
But you were in corporate training at that time? Had
No,
you begun
no.
to develop that practice? How were you making your living?
Oh, I was at this point from 1987 for the next 12 years. I was an HIV professional.
Got it.
So I was then an HIV
And
educator.
were you getting the national attention? Were you getting a chance to go around and do national spots and the work that you were doing?
Mostly it was Texas. So I was very involved in the politics
Well,
of
hell,
AIDS
it's a
in
nation
Texas.
of Texas. For God's sakes, we think of ourselves, is it?
Well, there were plenty enough good people in other parts of the country doing work too. We were all working together. And yes, I
Absolutely.
knew the people from LA AIDS Project, Gay Men's Health Crisis in New York. Yeah, I was working with all of those people.
So what was it teaching you about yourself during this time? Your own healing and healing through this process of becoming much more of a resilient, continuing using your resilience to be who you are and to grow yourself emotionally and spiritually and being more kind to yourself, as we were talking about before.
Well, I wasn't as good at being kind to myself, but I was able to throw myself into being kind to others and help others so
That's
much
the first
and give
spot.
back to
Yes,
others.
exactly.
And so my job, I was focused on, I've got to help other people who literally have no one else helping them. And even though it's helping them to die, I'm there to be there through that process and
We all
support
do.
them.
We're all going to get there.
And I went through at least 100 personal deaths, and then I had several hundred friends die. I mean, we used to go to funerals at least once a week or more. And we would have to decide which funeral to go to. Sometimes, well, I don't know, there's 2 of them today, which can we go to? Or, we've got 3 funerals today, but you would go there to honor your friends, and people are dying all around you. By the late 80s, it was just an everyday thing. And you were just waiting for which is going to be the day when my turn comes. And when Bruce, the man I was telling you with that had helped start AIDS Foundation Houston, and when he got sick in 1991, I had no idea how quickly he would go, but at a certain point he'd been so ill for so long, and he was one of the most beautiful men I'd ever met, and he had gone from that to having the KS lesions all over his skin and having blistering and just horrible, losing he used to work out and look great, and then now he's like a stick, and everything he identified about himself, which is what I did for myself too. When I started working out, I built up my self-esteem based on what I looked like.
Exactly.
And now I've got a disease that's going to have me look like one of these walking cadavers. And who would I be at that point, and could I deal with that? Or would I just kill myself when that happens? I don't know. And so having to find those answers during that period, and then going through Bruce's illness, and when he died, and how horrible that was, and then meeting Les and being in love again, and everything was going great for about almost 6 months of dating, and then suddenly he was diagnosed with AIDS. And then just a few months later, he got a brain disease, which was like Alzheimer's, except it happens within weeks instead of years. And within just a few weeks of us moving into the house that we had built together, he died a horrible death. And so I'm just waiting for, when is this going to happen to me? And in the meantime, going to seminars to help deal with this. And that's probably why I learned a lot about growth, is I did go to a lot of seminars and helping other people also learn about death, dying, how do you prepare for it, legally, psychologically. And I think I learned more about death and dying from that period that is a great gift to me now, because I don't fear death in any way. I could die tomorrow and it's like, yeah, I'm okay with that.
Gave it what we have.
Yeah, and I have a clear idea of what's going to happen afterwards, and I've had a near-death experience even, so I know what that experience is going to be, and realize it's not any different than anyone else's near-death experience. If they've truly had one, you've almost always heard it's an incredibly positive experience, nothing negative. And so I don't fear death or fear what's going to happen afterwards. I'm more, and I don't say afraid, but I'm more concerned right now with, how do I learn to get better at living in the moment?
Thank you. Because that is our opportunity.
And that's the biggest lesson I think I got out of all of this, is that you don't know what the future is going to be. I never assumed I was going to live to see 60, and next year I'm going to be turning 60. I was told I'd be dead before I was 30. So to be at this point and think, wow, maybe I should have done a better job saving money. But the whole point is I never planned to retire because I do something I'm passionate about. And as long as I can speak, I will always be teaching what I'm teaching, because
Exactly.
I love that. And I don't care who's my audience. But what I want to do is to find people where I can touch their lives in a way, if I can just give them a little bit of what I've learned and help them walk away with some more clarity and a way to follow their own paths that's going to make them happier and more successful in their own minds.
Yes.
That's all I want in life, is just to help people to be a little happier.
And your resilience is something that's so I mean, look at what you've been through. Look at the experiences that you've been through, but there is such a resilience to your consciousness and your personality.
Well, people will ask me sometimes, well, why you? How did you make it and other people didn't? Oh, I can't tell you that. I had friends
No
friends
way.
who did AIDS the right way. They meditated. They were so spiritual. They were so much at peace. They did all the right things. They ate the right foods. They tried all the experimental stuff.
Yep.
They did it all, and yet they still suffered and died.
Yep.
And I said, there's no one reason or not as to why it happens. You don't question that in life.
No.
Life is just life.
Isn't that the truth? Well, so all right. So what are you working on in Bart now? What inside your consciousness are you working on as a growth exercises, or the places that you want to grow?
The most important one I'm working on today, and I'm always working, shaping certain things in my life, but the one I've found is the most important is the key to all life, which if you ask anyone, what do you want out of life? Almost every person will answer it this way, or if you guide them this way, they'll go, oh my gosh, that's it. That's the one thing I want, which is people just want to be happy.
Yeah.
Or at least more happy with their life. I want to be a little
Sure.
happier in my life. I want to be able to say, I left this life and it was worth it. This trip on this earth, this short period of time that it is, was worth it. All the ups as well as the downs.
Absolutely.
Because if you don't have the downs, how do you even know what an
you
up
don't have
is?
contrast. You have no idea as to what it is. Yes.
And life has neither ups or downs. It just is. And today what I'm trying to do more than anything else is find a way to live in the now, which of course is the thing you hear from everyone today. But it took me almost 60 years to get to this point of how much of my life, I've certainly learned not to regret the past. Whatever decisions I made in the past, they were the past.
Yep.
And I wouldn't be the person I am today had I not had those experiences, however painful they might have been.
Thank you.
But I also have lots of moments of joy in my life. And learning how to take those moments and celebrating those, because they're special moments, but they're also brief, because the moment you have that moment of joy, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to change.
Sure.
And whether you like it or not, it's how life is. So don't just, once you get to this moment and say how sweet it is, say, yeah, but could be nicer. How is that celebrating? And so I noticed in my life in the last couple of years that I have this idea that life should go a certain way.
Yeah.
If I'm taking a flight, like tomorrow I'm going to be working in Oklahoma for the next week and I've got to go to several cities, I have a flight to catch at a certain time. That flight should leave at a certain time because I paid for that flight.
Damn right.
It needs to get me there. It needs to happen a certain way. What's the chance that it might not? Pretty good, because things in life rarely go exactly the way you plan.
Right.
But usually when it doesn't go according to plan, I tend to get stressed, upset, throw a tantrum, whatever it is. I'm going to make this into what it should be.
Exactly.
When it's out of my control. And what can you do about something that's out of your control? Well, by definition, you can't do anything about it. It is what it is, as my mother's favorite saying.
And that is where I think is the beauty of the Serenity Prayer. Because it
yes.
starts with, the beginning of it is, give me the serenity first. I want that serenity first, because there are things that I can change.
And what will make you serene, though? Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. It's the only choice you have. But how many of us don't accept it? We want to fight it.
Well, that's why I have to do the prayer 1,000 times a day if I can just begin to do it. I know that is really the key. Acceptance is the key to the solution to all of my problems. Is that acceptance? Is acceptance the way things are at this given moment?
Well, and the second part of that is the courage to change the things that I can, which means you
right.
have to take your focus off of what's out of your control, calm yourself down, because when your emotions are high, you can't think clearly. You got to calm yourself down and think, what is under my control? What are my choices here?
Exactly.
You may not like all the choices, but those
No.
are your choices, not
Exactly.
that. That's not a choice. Let that go and focus on these, and then to have the wisdom to tell the difference is the key. Because you can make choices, and that's the outcome of your life, is in the choices you make. You can't blame life, you can't blame other people. If you're making choices,
No.
you're completely responsible for the outcome in your life. So if you're not happy with that outcome, make different choices. And yet people won't let go of this. No, I want this.
Yep.
You're not getting that. Let that go. That is just what it is. I didn't want to be gay. It is what it is. I can learn to accept that and make the most of it, or I can fight it like some people do. I am HIV positive. I may always be HIV positive. But today we have medications that as long as you take medications, your immune system may never be depleted. And if your immune system is never depleted, you never get sick from anything. So you can be just as healthy. Now I have to deal with the problems that older people have. So I never thought I would have to live to deal with those old age problems.
Gee,
Hearing issues, eyesight. You know, now I've got some problems with my joints. I had my hip replaced. I've had my heart worked on. I never had to deal with those problems before, but it's like, well, but that's life.
Yep.
And I may only be around another 10 or 20 years, which is likely. I mean, how long do people live? Not very long. But it also may only be another day.
Yep.
And if so, it's okay, because I regret nothing. I've learned much, and I still want to learn more and teach more. And I would love to get to that point where every day in life, I can just accept life on its own terms.
Thank you.
And find those moments where when life goes the way you want it to go, take time and celebrate that. Have some joy for it, because what I typically have done was say, when things go the way I expected, my response is, well, that's what I expected.
Yeah.
Well, what joy is there in that? So instead, take a moment to celebrate those precious moments when life is at its sweetest. Those little moments when you see a beautiful flower, like this morning, we were at the Pond Society tour, and at our house, which was on the tour yesterday, in one of the ponds, they have these beautiful water lilies, and there was a lily I saw poking its head up. I said, in the next couple of days, it's going to come up and open, but it's not open today. And this morning, as we're leaving to go see some other ponds, ours was open and beautiful. And at that moment, we just stopped, just take a moment to look at it and wonder that. Now, it wasn't open so everyone could see it yesterday, but it's here now.
Yeah.
And take that moment to just take in that joy, because that's life.
That's when the Buddha, after he had experienced enlightenment, and they came and they asked him, what do you do the day after that? You chop wood and you carry water. And that's what you're talking about. Because if any moment is sacred, then all moments have to be sacred. They cannot be. The universe would spin out of control if that weren't true.
They are sacred as they are.
As they are. That's the point.
But the bigger point is, what's your choice?
Thank you.
And your choice is, do you choose to see it? And when you see it, like my favorite thing to teach people is, you first have to notice it. If you don't notice, it just passes you by.
Yeah.
A precious moment. The next thing is, you've got to own it.
Yep.
You know, it's like, what choices can I make here? And out of those choices, you can have any result you want. But if you want the best result, out of that clarity and looking at these choices, and because we have this in our brain, this prefrontal cortex, we can think about all these scenarios and decide, what's going to be the best choice for the outcome I want in my life? I can't control the outcome, but I can constantly make choices to move in a direction that makes my life happier, sweeter, more satisfied. And that's how I want to live in my life, so that whenever it ends, even, I'm having lots of shoulder pains now. That doesn't mean I'm going to stop working out, even though it's harder to do.
Sure.
But I also know it's part of keeping up this body, if I stop doing that, I'm going to really start
physicality.
feeling, yes, I take care of this this piece
Well,
of
hey, don't
mechanics.
you do that with your car?
Exactly.
Don't
and
you-
If,
don't
and if you
you-
can't replace your car, actually, I did have my hip replaced, but you can't replace your whole car.
Yeah.
Well, you can, but we can't replace us.
Yeah.
Not at this point. We can replace pieces, but you can also take care of it so it lasts longer. And accept the fact that that's true. I don't work quite as well as I did 10 years ago. My body's not the way it was, but it still works well.
It does, but who are you though that you are now 10 years later that you bring so much more to the table than you did 10 years ago?
Yes, as we look in the mirror and we see these wrinkles and say, oh, I shouldn't look like that. I said, this is the look of wisdom.
It is.
It's the look of experience. It says, you have lived, you have learned. I sometimes have people who are in their 20s who say, look, I'm now 21, you're almost 60, we're the same though, we're both adults.
Yep.
I said, no, we're not the same.
Yeah.
I have a lifetime of experience, of lessons I've learned that you have quite a road to follow. You've got a lot to go through in life before you get to here. But, that is all life. It's all about the experience and exploring it in every way possible and learning to, as I teach people, life is about that roller coaster ride.
Sure. Well, it is, but let me ask you about
Yeah.
something, Bart, about do you talk about the concept of what is enough?
I think it's important to realize that could not whatever you have today be enough for today? Well, one thing is, it is what it is. You're not going to have what you wanted, you have what you have. Could you not enjoy that moment?
Yeah. What am I leaving on the table?
Instead of thinking, my life has to get here before I'm happy.
Then I'm going to win. Don't worry. Once I get that, then I'm going to go ahead and then I'm going to relax. And then
Wouldn't
I'm gonna
life be sweet then?
Yeah. Yeah. But that is not what we're going to do. That's not what we're having.
And you may not get that choice to have life get to that level of sweetness at some point in the future. You only have today. And can you make the most of that? And that's what I'm working on most in my life. Because, as I said, life is like a roller coaster. I mean, do you ride the roller coaster this way? Oh, I'm not getting on there. Well, no, life says you got to get on there.
Yeah.
And you're going to have, but how do you enjoy that ride even if you're forced on it? Do you do it this way?
Yeah.
Or do you do it this way?
Exactly.
I kind of think life is more about this and
Just-
enjoying it.
Exactly. And if you can do that, if you can give that, if you can give that time, if you can give that moment to be able to accept and see, what are we doing here that's fun? What are we doing here that's exciting? What are we doing here that's valuable? What is it doing? What am I doing here that can contribute something?
And looking at what your choices are and saying, well, I have a variety of choices of how my day could go. What choices do I want to make that's going to add to my happiness or satisfaction in my
Yeah.
life?
And I find that my internal world is a really good mirror of my external world. So that if I am coming up against all kinds of blockages and people or problems and their annoyances, there's something going on in here. And that if I can be more peaceful in here, suddenly things seem to change in the outside world. I mean, it's like very much my world is built inside out.
And you had asked me, well, what do you do to treat yourself more kindly?
Precisely.
And I'd thought about that book that I'd read by Pollard years and years ago called Self-Parenting, which teaches transactional analysis. And most people are familiar with that. It's your inner child, your inner parent. You struggle with this. Your parent is always telling you, you need to get up, you need to go to work, you need to stay focused, you need to earn money, you're just constantly beating up on ourselves. We're just not good enough. And I said, well, imagine if you had a child, is that how you want to treat your child?
Thank you.
You're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not young enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not this, you're not that. And it's like, you are who you are and you're perfect as you are. And as a parent, you would tell your child, you are wonderful. How should parents treat their children? You want to let them know you have unlimited possibility.
Yep.
That you are perfect just as you are. You have your own challenge, your own skills. You may not be this, but you have that. Make the most of that, of those gifts. But how often do we say that to ourselves and treat our inner child
Exactly.
with that level of love?
And that's what I'm asking. That's what that is really the big key in my life right now is doing exactly that.
Well, the first thing you have to do is you've got to notice when you do it.
Yep.
And then, of course, if you're doing it, are you making choices that's resulting in this, the way you're treating yourself? Are you telling yourself things that are loving and supportive?
Yep.
Or are you beating yourself up for not being enough?
Exactly.
And what good is there in beating some child and saying, you're not good enough, as if that's going to make you want to get better? Well, that's what builds you into a strong personality. You got to beat yourself up because you got to beat other people up.
Yep.
Well, would you beat up a child to get them to be good enough? Maybe 100 years ago, that's what some parents were taught. You've got to beat these children into submission because that's how you make a successful child.
Exactly.
And it didn't work then. It doesn't work today.
No.
You've got to teach them and support them and be the most loving support, because we're not often our best loving support.
But that's what I'm rewiring that.
Well, that's the whole point, is you've got to retrain your brain, because you've put messages, or society's put messages
Both.
into your brain that
Both.
you believe to be true, which are
We've owned
not
it.
true. The things we're telling ourselves, and this is what most people tell themselves: I'm not good enough, I don't matter, I'm not smart enough, I'm stupid,
Yep.
whatever. And none of those things are true.
The imposter syndrome comes up so much, even in incredibly
Exactly.
successful people, that they say, if they only knew.
Uh-huh. And there are people who use that to be successful. There's lots of people, including some people who are high up in politics, who, not only do, say, I'm better than everyone else,
Yep.
but they love putting down other people because it makes
Exactly.
them feel better. But deep down inside, you
wait-
know what they're really telling
Yeah,
themselves.
but exactly. I have never known, Bart, a single person who was arrogant, that was ever arrogant, except out of smallness.
Exactly.
I've never met them. I've never met them. All of the people that I would admire or follow that have been kind and gracious and open, and no matter what level of success that they've gotten.
Well, I would ask you, who do you need to prove yourself to? Who does it matter to? There are people out there trying to, as we grow up, one of the most important messages we get in our minds is, I've got to make sure my parents approve of me and my choices, because they matter to me. And it's really hard if you have parents in your life who don't approve of you.
Yes.
And they know that is the most powerful tool I can use, because you want my approval and I can keep it from you. And say, I'll give you some approval if you do it my way. My grandmother was like this with my mother, and which was much of the cause of my mother's challenges in her life, was she grew up always believing she was never good enough, and that any choices she made was never going to be good enough. And she would even say, oh, I don't know if my mother would approve of me moving here. I said, she's been dead 35 years. Why would it matter? And the only thing that matters is, do you think it's a good decision for you? And yet it's so powerful because of the damage, the scars from our childhood, of things that we've told ourselves and that we hold in here, and we believe it to be true, and yet it's not true. You have to it'd be great if we could just take the brain and wash all that stuff out and put loving, warm things in there. And yet it's hard for many people.
Well, of course. Do you see 2019 and 2020 and this to be a significant change and growth in the consciousness of the human being?
I believe that there's a lot more out there than ever before to help people to do this, to retrain their brain and what they're telling themselves. There were things years ago, and some of them still exist today. I know Scientology has its methods. There are other programs, Landmark and More to Life, and other programs out there that do
We're on the left side?
Yes, the left side.
Okay.
Answer, and then that way you can ask.
That is my good side.
You can ask for the other side if you want.
No, that
I
is
don't
my
have a
good
good
side.
side, so it's like, oh well. It just is what it is.
Okay.
I'll let it
But I
be.
need to go to the restroom.
Yes, do that. Hi, Dennis.
Hello.
I guess he has my phone and stuff, so I don't know where he went. I guess he went that way. I'll see y'all later.
Okay, thank you so much. Good to see you.
It's good to see you.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Here, should I leave my purse out here? You want my
Put
purse
it
locked
right
down?
here in
Oh,
this
okay.
room if you would like, or I can hold it in the conference room.
Either way.
Okay.
I trust, I've absolute trust. Just zip it up so everything can go out.
I'll put it right here inside the door.
Are you okay with the chill factor?
Oh, I'm fine. I wear a
Okay.
sweater.
Wonderful. Okay, so you're in the same seat as Bart, and I'm not sure this is his water. Is this your water?
Not my water. I just walked in.
Oh, that's,
Is that Bart?
yep. Hey, Bart.
Oh, there I am.
There you are.
Wait, I can't. This is like opposite.
Yeah, you like the purple glow?
What is
The
that?
restrooms are right to the left.
oh.
He might have gone
Do
there.
you like the purple glow on your hair?
It's like I did some very current, edgy, trendy hair processing.
Yeah, just like you are. You're all those things.
Is that light making her hair like maroon?
Purple.
Yes.
The purple aura.
I didn't notice that. You know,
Yep. Hi. Now, why is that my bad side?